I believe we should begin anyways, without any hesitation. I think people will join in, and yeah, that will be there. I think I'm visible now. Yeah, great. So, again, so I think as the chair of ISAIL, I'm very happy to begin this session and let Arunima and Sanjana begin with this session. Just for a quick introduction, since this is being recorded, the draft digital personal data protection rules were released in conjunction with the DPDP Act by the Government of India's Tech Ministry or IT Ministry or METI. And since they were released on January the 3rd, it had left a sense of concern that people should, not just lawyers but also non-legal stakeholders. I think most of us here are in the legal side of things, but if anyone, we had made it very clear that if people really wish to discuss about the draft rules, they have any feedback. I've been a part of some sessions. We thought that even ISAIL should do one. So let me quickly introduce our brilliant chairs for the session. So we have Arunima and Sanjana. Both of them are patron members in the data privacy group. And while Arunima specializes in media law as well as AI and IP law and data protection law, Sanjana also specializes in data protection law and AI governance at her best. So yeah, I am passing the baton to both of you now. So all the best, and let's see how this goes. Let's hope that we get the best feedback, and we hope that a good outcome document comes out of it. So yeah, over to you, Arunima.
Thank you, Bogdan. I think today I'll be discussing some of the key aspects of the draft DPDP rules, including the personal data transfers and localization requirements. What are the impact of AI and innovation, and how startups and MSMEs can navigate compliance challenges. I'll also touch upon the government's power, which is to request information under the 7th schedule of the Constitution, and conclude with insights into the future of data governance in India. Like we all know, these rules have been published on 3rd of January, right? Um, I'm handling the screen also, so please bear with me. These draft rules were published on Jan 3rd of this month, and Jan 3rd, and they are open for feedback until Feb 18. So this means any businesses, industry experts, and even the individuals can provide their inputs on the MyGov platform. The idea is to make the rules more practical and inclusive by incorporating diverse perspectives. So my suggestion would be, if you have any concerns, please, it's the time to voice them. And let me, begin by explaining in short what are the main elements which are there in the draft DPDP rules, and then we can probably move to the scheme of the discussion. And Sanjana, please feel free to pitch in case you feel that, there is something that you want to add
Yes, sure,
here.
will do. And we'd like to say the same for the rest of the attendees of the meeting as well. The whole purpose of this is to create a forum where everybody is able to pitch in and, we'd like to draw feedback and opinions from everybody. So it'll be great if we can have a very interactive session from the audience point as well.
Can I
So,
request to make the slide slightly bigger?
um, okay, let me just see. Can you see the screen now better?
Yeah, much better, much better. This is the best.
Yeah, so, okay, to big, just allow me. Uh, it's visible, right? Hello? Is it visible to everybody?
It is visible. Yeah.
Yes, yes, it is.
Yeah, so let's, the uh, These draft rules aim to bring the 2023 Data Protection Act into action, and they sort of list out the compliance requirements for businesses. So things like how do you collect the data and manage personal data responsibly. The focus here is on transparency. It is on minimizing unnecessary data collection and being accountable for the data that you are collecting. So it's all about binding trust with your customers while staying on the right side of the law. Um, Now, to begin, we have a data protection board, or DPB. This is the new authority that has been established under the DPDP Act. The board is tasked with resolving data-related complaints, making sure that businesses are following these rules, and even penalizing them for any sort of violations that happens at their end. This is designed to operate digitally, which makes grievance handling much more faster and much efficient. For businesses, this would mean that you will have a clear regulatory body to interact with, but also sort of increased accountability here. These rules, let's discuss the operationalization of DPDPA. Now, these, like I said, they aim to bring in the 2023 Data Protection Act into action, and they sort of, lay out the compliance requirements. The next important element of these rules are the privacy notice. Okay. Now, the purpose of a privacy notice is very straightforward. It ensures that individuals who are referred as data principals under the Act have a clear understanding of how their personal data is being used, why is it being collected, and whether they feel comfortable sharing it or not. So essentially, it's all about empowering your customers to make informed decisions about their data. There are four essential elements of privacy notice. There is an itemized data requirement to ensure that any sort of personal detail that the businesses need from the customer, they are they are specified. For example, if an e-com platform, if you're registering on an e-com platform, they may require your name, email addresses, and phone number to onboard you. These are itemized data requirements. Then they have to specify the purpose. They have to clearly explain why the data is being collected. For instance, if you're sharing your contact details, it is to verify your identity and to provide you services, so or send you some sort of a market update. Now, these kind of transparency, this transparency is essential. And then we have goods and service description. So it is important for to outline what businesses will provide by using the customer's data. For example, if you're shopping online, the notice might explain how your data will be used to personalize recommendations or processes, and to also process your orders. So that's there. And then the last being the complaint mechanism. This is the most important element because the privacy notice must provide the customers with clear way to raise complaints or escalate issues if their data has been mishandled. This would include how do you contact the business and, if necessary, escalate the matter to the proposed data protection board. Sanjana, what are the key areas of your discussion?
Hi, so I will be dealing with the point about the complexity in processing children's data. I will also be covering the obligation of significant data fiduciaries and the additional point obligations that are involved from their end. Then I will be raising the floor for discussion on the need for recourse for data principles under the current act and the rules. And then the final point that we'll be discussing in this particular session is the implementation challenges for data minimization and data retention period.
Right. So whichever slide you feel that, you want to, pitch in, you want to add to the details which are already mentioned, please feel free to do that.
So we'll do that.
Okay, the next part is the consent manager interoperable platform. This is, sorry. Yeah, so, they have introduced a consent manager, okay, to enable data principals to manage their consent efficiently. They allow data fiduciaries to kind of process their consent seamlessly to deliver goods and services. Now, this platform will provide you a standardized mechanism for consent management across various sectors, which will reduce the operational burden on fiduciaries. And this will also ensure that data principals are maintaining the control over their own personal data. Under the DPDP rules, a consent manager is classified as a regulated activity. So they have to be registered with the DPB board, which is the Data Protection Board, before they can operate. And they have, they have to ensure transparency. A minimum net worth of rupees 2 crores is essential for this, and there have to be financial and operational capacity. They should have to manage efficiently the sensitive data and to ensure that they are securely stored and they are effectively managed. Some of the key obligations of consent manager would also include that they cannot store or analyze personal data. They can only facilitate the consent exchange without accessing or processing the underlying data. That's a very important part of it. The consent manager again cannot assign us or subcontract the responsibilities without taking prior approval from the Data Protection Board. And they have to ensure that they are avoiding also all sort of conflict interest with the data fiduciaries to ensure that there is impartiality, and they're also protecting the privacy of the data principles. Now, these will act as intermediaries without directly processing or storing data. Okay. These are some of the essential security measures for data protection. Now, okay, here, see, there is a baseline requirement when it comes to security. These measures would these measures emphasize that there has to be a clear contractual obligation between a data fiduciary and the processor to ensure that there is an accountability and compliance. Plus, the businesses are now required to adopt advanced technical safeguards like encryption, data masking, and even the access control, along with the organizational practices like maintaining logs and backups. One of the key highlight is the obligation to retain logs with a minimum of 1 year to aid in a breach investigation, which also aligns with the existing certain directives for the ICT systems. So these rules also stress that there has to be a timely reporting of the personal data breaches. Which is same like certain, wherein you have to report within 6 hours for cyber incidents and 72 hours to the Data Protection Board for breaches involving personal data. And these measures will not only ensure compliance, but they will also significantly reduce risk. It will help businesses to build trust and customers to sort of, build to have a more enhanced security while they're sharing their personal data with these businesses. So I think Sanjana, here you can talk about the processing of the children's data
Yes,
and the
I'll take
data of
over.
the persons who are disabilities, and focus of obtaining verifiable consent.
So thank you, Arunima. And I will begin with the part that's dealing with children's data and processing of personal data which belongs to persons with disability. So as per the draft DPDP rules, the rules basically say that data fiduciaries should obtain parental consent before processing children's data. Now, there's a lot of ambiguities involved, and there's a lot of exceptions that are being provided as well here. So the first part is verifying parental consent. So the rules provide for obtaining consent, but then we also need to verify the age and identity of the parents. And they provide two mechanisms for that. One is using the reliable details that the parents themselves provide, or verifying those details through approved and authorized entities such as digital locker services. And when it comes to lawful guardians as well, there's the need for verifying the same, verifying the identity and the appointment of such guardians, and to check if they're appointed by the court of law, a local level committee, or any other authorized body. So now the question arises as to what happens when children don't really identify themselves as children and fake their way through. So these sort of questions and pointers will be like raising, and we'll be discussing them through the later part of the session. But I'd also want to discuss the key exemptions that are given on obtaining these consent before processing children's data. So the rules basically allow for certain exemptions when it comes to healthcare, education, safety, and security of these children, or for the purposes of obtaining any benefit, subsidy, or other monetary benefits. So, in these particular purposes, it is not required to obtain children's consent. So, that's what the draft rules say about this particular aspect. I think we could move on to the next slide, please. So the next slide is about data principal rights and grievance redressals. So the rules provide an ample method to enable data principals to exercise their rights under the Act. So there is the rules require a specific section where data fiduciaries must uh, basically inform data principals on how exactly they can exercise their rights. They need to provide the manner in which they can exercise their rights, and also they must set a specific response time frame within which they shall reach out and address such grievances. They also need to provide a specific link and a point of contact about a person who shall address such queries or any other grievances that they possibly might have with regards to the way that data, personal data, is being processed. Could we move on to the next slide? Thank you. The next is about significant data fiduciaries. Now, this is another category of data fiduciaries which also has certain ambiguities, but the rules basically provide for certain additional obligations that such entities are required to undertake. One is an annual data protection impact assessment. The second is a compliance audit, and both of these are supposed to be conducted, and a report is supposed to be prepared, and the same is supposed to be furnished with the Data Protection Board. The second is the appointment of a data protection officer to oversee the privacy and data protection related aspects in the particular organization. The third is algorithmic due diligence. So basically, data fiduciaries are required to ensure that any and all algorithms that they deploy within their organization does not harm the data principal rights that are given under the DPDP Act. So these are certain pointers that the draft DPDP rules essentially raise. Over to you, Arunima.
Yeah, and just to add to this, let me touch upon the localization requirement and what happens when there is a cross-border, transfer. So there is a restriction on that. Now, the transfer would essentially require compliance with our central government notification, which might limit our operational flexibility and may increase compliance cost for certain businesses. Now, implicit localization requirements would also entail to process certain sensitive data within India, and that could impact the global businesses by requiring infrastructural changes within the country, and also bringing in certain operational realignments. If you ask me honestly, I think these are some of the, I mean, while they have allowed the data transfer, the vague criteria for data transfer permissions might deter investment and innovation, especially for small startups and the MSMEs. Um, and I think the other part of it is also the AI and innovation, wherein the data minimization principles have been introduced with stricter retention policies that may hinder the AI models, which are largely dependent on these large data sheets for training. There is a requirement for ensuring there is no discriminatory algorithm, which also might slow down the whole adoption of the advanced AI tools. And while fostering trust, mandatory compliances have been introduced, but this might discourage certain startups from experimenting with certain specific kind of innovative technologies. Now, just sorry, you just bear with me. I'm planning to. I think yeah. So apart, okay. I'll just stop sharing this presentation. I hope no questions from the audience as of now.
I think what can be done at this moment is, since this presentation has covered the 101 of the January rules draft, I think we can segment the pointers of the discussions and let it be opened up to others. And I think both of you can, steer it up to ask, okay, is there anything would like to add up as a matter of feedback? Like what could be, because see, I'll give a very practical perspective on this. I think from a perspective of feedback, whatever it would be suggested, it should be more around, first of all, obviously making things more clarified if there are things which are not, of course, the lingo, the language. Second aspect, which obviously comes in these consultations, is how, if there is something which is about a technical infrastructure which is behind ensuring any compliance or any sort of interoperable aspect of adherence, then what's the clarified understanding? That applies even to data localization, especially for SDFs. But I think, again, that we can discuss all of that. So I'm just giving some basic ground rules of how we can take this up. So yeah, I
Sure.
think, yeah.
I think, Abhivadan, you have touched upon a very critical aspect of this law. And the other part is, while we were discussing the consent manager, let me reiterate by saying that while it has been introduced, but they may face several operational and the regulatory challenges. I mean, unlike the account aggregator framework, which is mandated by regulatory bodies, let's say RBI, SEBI, or IDAI, the DPDP rules does not explicitly require data fiduciaries to kind of integrate with consent manager. Okay. And to me personally, I think the absence of a mandate limit, limits the whole scalability and effectiveness of a consent manager. And while an account aggregator may operate in, let's say BFSI domain with clear guidelines, a consent manager must operate across diverse industries. So you are providing bespoke solutions. You are, and these are more like adding to more complexity. Unlike the account aggregators, which are sometimes very specific, partner with technical service providers to analyze financial data. Now, to me, consent manager are again strictly prohibited from analyzing or deriving value from the data they handle. So these kind of restrictions sort of eliminate a potential revenue stream. And but then, like, everything has its pros and cons. So while it eliminates the potential revenue stream, it also reinforces their role as a neutral intermediary. So anybody from audience, what is your viewpoint for business models, and what should be their considerations for while appointing these consent managers? How do you think we can develop a more sustainable framework, with of course the operational feasibility?
It's like food. It's like food. You cannot rush food. I mean, you can, but then what you get, it's a toxic, nasty poison. And so it happens all the time with data too. Everybody has to understand that all these businesses offering services, why they offer those services? Yeah, to make money. Well, but the money comes from your data mostly for these services, okay? It's not coming from anything else. It's coming from your data, just that, like that. Your data, or if you're a business, your business data, and whatever, the moment you connect to it, you're fingerprinted, and that used to profile you big time, not a little bit, but like down to the detail. Yeah, they say we anonymize blah blah blah. Well, no, man, because your router is unique, right? How anonymize that? So you're not really anonymized, because and even if you're completely anonymized, which is impossible, you can be de-anonymized, and it's not that complicated, because all that metadata is not anonymized. You have enough metadata, i.e., for example, time when you connect and for how long and where. And then I can track you cradle to grave. It's that simple, and it happens all the time. So the point here is that how many times anyone here saw that they are opted out by default of data collection. So you say, we only collect only what's necessary, because otherwise we can't really offer you a service. And that's the default setting. If you want more, I don't know, you want nice advertising, you like it, click this, but how many times? Very, very few times. It does happen, but not many times compared to the rest. Okay. Why is that done? Because that's where the money is. So all these managers, whatever you want to call them, should actually enforce to be data collection unless the necessary, not talking about the necessary data to run the service, anything extra to be turned off by default, inform the user and offer it a simple meaning to turn it on, because there will be certain features that really have to use more data than the minimum. That is, it's valid, but the user have to know about it. And so they may want to turn it on because they say it's worth it. That choice is rarely given. And it's usually, if it is given, well, it's like are we gonna collect everything? Oh, you can say no, but then you can't use anything. You can't use our service. So it's take it or leave it. So that is a principle that you don't roast and cook a chicken in 30 minutes unless you want to poison yourself. You roast it and cook it for what? Almost 2 hours. And you don't make a biryani in 2 hours because that's like a nonsense mash, like the tasteless and rubbish. You cook it for 6 hours, maybe even 10. Heck, if you want best results, 18, but that's a challenge. But 6 hours, not 2, for good reason, because that's the laws of physics and the laws of the world, and nobody can change the laws of the world unless they God, and obviously nobody is God. And it's the same with these people. I know, maybe they think they are immortal, and we see they rubbish the planet, right? So the principle is, the moment you connect to an AI system of any sort, especially those that use generative AI in some form or shape, it doesn't matter how, that moment your privacy is up for grabs. And there's nothing you can do more effectively than disconnect. That's it. You say, yeah, but I can't live my life. I mean, yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. You just have to change your mindset. Now, coming back to the principle here is don't rush. Don't rush. Don't rush to click a button. Don't rush to allow access as a regulator. Don't rush to allow access because we stifle innovation. Well, when there are no rules, like in the Wild West, it's very easy to innovate, right? How? By killing off people. That's where it goes, right? It goes to people dying in one way or another. Say, well, but we don't shoot people like in the Wild West. Well, actually you do. Actually you do. Just before this meeting, I thought I would be gonna be late. So Paul McCartney was on the BBC talking exactly about that the UK government is, apparently bending over to all these nasties and just ripping off the IP rights laws. But what will happen with the creators, right? And that is a principle of law. Like what you create, you should be the primary owner unless you sign off your rights. But what happens now with this proposal is that you don't have to sign off your rights because you have no rights because they're already taken over by all these platforms. Because how? By training with your creation, a song, I know, video clip, even a movie, your interviews that you're paid for because, well, people learn from it big time, right? On the cheap. And so that goes into training all these models. But how many models are there? You say, oh, but you are opt-in by default, but you can opt out. Really? No, you can't opt out. Why? Because it's not you opt out from one place or two places. You don't even know from how many places and where. Because there are thousands of wrapper models. These small companies that say they are AI companies, they are not AI companies. What they do, they put you a new web interface, like different colors, and they say, we offer you a unique service. But back of the stack, it's ChatGPT, 3 or 4 or whatever. Okay, it's Anthropic of sorts. It's Gemini, whatever number. This is what it's powered. But these are thousands of them. So you opt out from all those thousands because data travels around. So really it's not possible to opt out. And so what happens is that you're going to end up having no creators because they can't make a living. Why? Because they do not own the act of their creation. Them and the people that help them to do that. You know, people playing the music in the orchestras, not just the lead singer, people writing the songs, people writing the stories in movies and all. The money are made, but they are not going anywhere near the creators.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
fundamental change in society for the worse.
Yeah.
So it's akin to shooting people in a firing squad.
Yeah.
That's what it is, because if you can't make a living, you actually end up dead.
Yeah.
And that's very serious. So coming back to don't rush principle is like, how is your data essentially, how do you own your data? So shouldn't that not be a principle stated there? We ensure that your data is yours unless you're giving it up. Is that happening in GDPR? To a point, but it's not really about ownership GDPR, right? It's putting some barriers here and there. It's not like, let's face it, we don't own, yeah, like you are Arunima, you don't own your data. The moment you connect to Teams, like your face is gonna be used to train all those things. Okay, you may be okay with that because, hey, first of all, what can they take? Well, we're talking about laws and this and that. You might be very much okay with it. Did they tell you that? Yeah, if you read 100 pages. So that's the principle. Can the law
It
state
see
that creators own the
so
data?
yeah, and to add on to what you just said, it will also limit the ability of businesses to gather large data sets, okay, which are essential for training AI models. I mean, I understand that to ensure algorithmic due diligence is necessary, but without a detailed guideline, they are just adding a layer of complexity. There is a lot of uncertainty in the implementation phase. And when we talk about small startups or we talk about MSMEs, there are financial constraints. I mean, for a MSME to implement an advanced security measures, for example, encryption or access control, it would require them to invest significantly. There is a resource challenge. You are having limited expertise in managing complex data framework, and then there is a whole compliance of the audit as well. So yeah, I think the one thing that also government needs to consider is to ensure readiness for potential audits and the compliance checks when it comes to these companies, especially with the startups and MSMEs. They have to ensure, should introduce more simplified compliance path for smaller entities. Probably that would help. And of course, leverage third-party consent manager to reduce operational burdens on when it comes to the companies. So just to add on to, whatever you were saying.
The use cases of anything powered by whatever generative AI form of sorts are essentially next to no existent. In practical terms, I mean, yeah, they are made up. You can made up a lot of things. That doesn't mean you should have them or that they are practical. What is the type of business in India that innovates the most? I'll tell you what type of business is. It's street food. The street food, those poor people, pretty much, they are not rich. They're all over the place, many, many, many thousands of them, millions, I guess. They essentially are the biggest innovators, bigger than Tata, bigger than everyone. And you say, well, how come, what they offer? Well, they offer something for pretty much all of India. Well, heck, for everyone even visiting India, it really is a universal service. Okay, that's one. How many big companies offer a universal service? None. Okay, so that's one. Why is it a universal service? Because it's simple, natural food, cook as it should be, not fast, but they can manage the fast turnaround, right? And they cater for they don't want to say, I'm not going to deliver to the whole of India or to an entire state. No, it's here and 20 streets around. That's it. But there are many of them, and you have all this variety. You walk 20 streets, there's another one that is not really the same. Still good quality, still cheap, still readily available and cooked proper, but it's different. 20 streets away. So you have the variety at country level, well, continent level, because India is like a continent, right? Okay. It's never boring because it's done right, because they abide by the laws of the world and physics. And they know their place in the world. Unlike this, many of these very rich people, not all of them, because they are rich people, they are very much humble, that they're disconnected from reality. And we see the results. So, but for that, what they have to do? Well, they have to ensure that, first of all, people who buy from them, they are happy. Like they don't get poisoned. They don't have so many offerings that it's hard to choose from. Very simple, nutritious, good, and so on. Like I'm sure all of them have onion budgies. They should have, and they do. Simple food, right? That goes with everything. So no mambo jumbos. No mambo jumbos. And they adapt fast. The biggest, I would say, the biggest, the most important life form in existence today is not people, is the amoeba, because it existed for, well, nobody knows for how long. They say 750 million years, could be very well another 50 million on top, 800 million years. It's a unicellular organism that is considered to be stupid, but is the oldest form of life in existence today. And it went through 5 mass extinctions. Now,
Let me touch, let me,
how does it relate to the law? How does it relate to the law? It's very
I'll
simple in
just
a
hold
way.
on to that. Just hold on to that thought, okay? Because you touched upon important aspects of GDPR as well, and I wanted to, pose this question to the audience again. The DPDP rule has permitted the government personnel to access data for specific purposes, which is sovereignty, any sort of national security, or public safety. Now, businesses must ensure compliance while safeguarding data privacy. One of the, power which has been given in the 7th schedule. Now, these provisions, they may pose challenges for EU data controllers, which means that while you're transferring data to India, you have to assess the adequacy under the GDPR. So I wanted to pose this question to the audience. Why do you think that this will balance the transparency with compliance, while ensuring that we have a robust internal governance framework in place? And will it also enhance the cross-border data partnership, or will it hinder on the on certain aspects? So over to you, anybody from the audience.
So we also welcome the experts from the advisory council. If anyone wishes to engage, like Atul, Ajay, or anyone, and yeah, Kailash, you're also welcome. So please, anyone who wishes to engage on a point on this, so that we go on for other discussion points as well. In the interest of time, we have enough time. We still have an hour that is around 59 minutes. But please, anyone, please feel free to add it on this. I'll not be speaking simply because I speak too much, and I've already said too much, and I'll not share my feedback personally on the rules publicly. But I'll be more than happy to let people in ISAIL, add their say on this. So I will be the least to speak about today. So if I'm mute today, that's the reason. It's a conscious decision. So please feel free to add in. I mean, there is no problem with that. We'd appreciate it. Maybe, yeah.
It will enhance it if it's not stored in India. It will not enhance it, on the contrary, if it is stored in India. So if it just goes in India, is consumed, but is not stored, then it will enhance, because it will give you access to EU markets. If it is stored, that is very different, because it has to be managed, and that involves a lot of complications which are costly.
Okay. Anybody else to, if you feel that these may pose challenges for EU data controllers who are transferring data to India? Any point of view there, or probably somebody from the committee can answer this? Like how are we going to, balance transparency with compliance?
I think it will come only through practice. We'll have to see how things are going to be in place once the rules are put to practice. Otherwise, it is going to be very difficult to understand how say for example, mm, uh, the role of consent managers. You're talking about a person who's a middleman sort of person, right? I mean, at the end of the day, like
Right.
a blocker or something of that sort, right? So
Right.
what is it that you are expected to do? I mean, what sort of how much of data, how much of protection is it going to be equal to that of a data fiduciary, or is it going to be a new role that you are bestowed with? Is something that is to be seen. The second aspect is also about, say, for example, the child protection. This thing. Uh, the consent that has been given, how is the government going to, or how is anybody going to ensure that it is actually the parent or the guardian who's signing for the child? There's nothing to show that. So these are the aspects that someone needs to actually think through.
Uh, of course, and I think most of us, the businesses, are hinging upon the clarity of these provisions. It's still a bare skeleton, if I may put it that way, if I can take the liberty of saying this. And again, I mean, on the positive side, while the act is opening up opportunities for consent manager, and allowing the privacy-focused platforms to flourish, the businesses that provide interoperable, user-friendly solutions, um, they for managing consent, they can drive innovation, and they have to balance it while ensuring compliance. So if we align India's DPDP framework with the global standards, something like GDPR, the DPDP Act will be more attractive destination for a privacy compliant technological development, and it will boost more foreign investment. I work with a global MNC, okay, and I think for us, the emerging fields like AI governance, blockchain, all of that is very attractive, and we prioritize ethical and privacy centric approaches. For businesses who are global, who have a global standing, ultimately looking at something which is more sustainable in the long run. So, of course, balancing regulatory obligations with business agility will be the key to thrive this evolving data governance landscape. To put it in a more simplified manner, Atul
No,
N, please,
you're
feel.
you're absolutely right. See, the thing is that, at the end of the day, the consent managers are still considered to be a third person or a third party in the whole gambit of things. So there is always going to be an element of risk that is going to be imposed on this third party, so-called, third parties of consent managers. So it is going to be, they need to, there is a lot more requirement for somebody to actually lay down as to what is it that the consent managers are expected to do in so far as the data that is being made available to them. You are basically holding this information, and it's not a small information. You're holding this information for a very long time, and what sort of liability comes upon you is going to be very critical, because more than the data fiduciary, I feel that at some point of time there is a more there's more requirement of a liability on the consent managers at the end of the day, because they are the ones who are holding the information for the longest period of time and managing the consent.
Absolutely. And again, the certain consideration, like what happens if in case of a death or incapacity of the data, data subject. How do we empower individuals while ensuring that businesses who are handling these personal data are doing it
So I think that
responsibly?
there is a provision for nominees, appointment of nominees, right? I mean, I think there is an element, there is a section which provides for nominees as well.
Yeah, there is a
Yes.
right for data principles in this aspect.
Yeah, so that has to be probably made mandatory. I mean, at the end of the day, you will have to pass on this information to somebody else if there is a death. You can't just keep it for with you once. Okay, this person has died. Now I'm going to just delete it. No, you can't do that because these might be sensitive information. At the end of the day, somebody would be requiring this information. If I die today and my wife is the one who's required to get this information, then she has to be the person who's to be then it is going to be the data fiduciaries or the consent manager's duty to actually pass it on to the nominee. So to my mind, appointment of a nominee is very, very essential, and it should be made mandatory rather than making it as a choice.
Yes, and I think the purpose of data collection has been very clearly defined. There is a timeline of retention also defined under the DPDP rule, that you can retain the data only when it is required by law, or you can retain for specific period for specific entities. I think there is a 3-year maximum retention period which are applicable to large e-commerce, social media, or online gaming intermediaries, which are holding some million users data. And then of course they also have to notify the data principal within 48 hours prior to the deletion of their personal data. So retaining minimal data for account access is also been allowed for once the erasing has been done.
Without prejudice to the laws which are otherwise in existence. Which is, say, for example, in the company law, you are required to there are or the companies are required to keep certain information for a period of 10 years or something of that sort, right? I mean, there are other laws which would require an organization to keep such data for a longer period of time. So
Yes, there's
this
different laws in different sectors as well. So I think there is a challenge there as well to understand how to comply with different sectoral laws as well. And with regards to the data retention, also the current rules specify retention timelines only for three sectors, that is the online gaming intermediaries, social media intermediaries, and e-commerce entities. So I think it also raises a very valid question as to what do the other sectors do? Are they allowed to have flexible retention schedules? Because if there is nothing as prescribed under the law, it's basically up to those data fiduciaries to come up with their own plans. So there might also be questions that are raised as to how only certain sectors have specific stringent timelines to follow, whereas others have some more flexible options available. So the entire impact of having a retention period kind of gets diluted in the process. So I think I would also like to raise a question to the audience and as well, Atul as well, as to how do you think we can approach this particular challenge?
There are other laws which come into place here. Like, for example, as I said, you have other regulatory frameworks which establish or which sort of mandates a particular body to retain information for a certain period of time. It is not just under the DPDP. So, if not under the DPDP, then DPDP certainly mandates certain sectors to definitely keep the information for a certain period of time. But then, insofar as other organizations are concerned, I'm sure that they would have their own set of regulations. If where there is a vacuum, of course, we'll have to figure out that there has to be some sort of a suggestion that has to come in to see where, or rather, we need to identify which are those sectors which would require retention of information, and then make suggestions appropriately.
I think to add on to what Atul and Sanjana you have touched upon, um, the processing of children's data and the data of persons with disabilities, the focus of businesses should be for obtaining verifiable consent to ensure that you are taking care of their privacy and protection. For children, you must ensure, if you are a business or a data fiduciary, that you get the consent from an adult who would identify as a parent. These can be verified by using reliable details like DigiLocker, government issued tokens, or existing identity and age information. And importantly, businesses are not required to verify the actual parent-child relationship, just that the person is giving consent, who is giving consent is an adult. And similarly, a person with disability, the consent must come from a lawful guardian, especially when the individual cannot make a legally binding decision due to certain disabilities like autism, cerebral palsy, or multiple impairment, etc. Now, here as a business, you have to be very careful. You have to take that extra care to verify that the guardian is legally appointed under the applicable law. And that being said, there are also exceptions where consent isn't required. For example, if you're a healthcare services provider, you are into education or you are into government function, provided you are utilizing the data only for those specific purposes. So and you cannot engage in other, apart from that, you cannot engage in any sort of targeted advertising or behavioral tracking for children. There are very limited exceptions to that, and the way I see it, the rules have been designed in a way to protect the vulnerable group more, but thereby also enabling the essential services in more compliant way. So
And just to add on to that, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but just to add on to that, I think there's while they're trying to protect the vulnerable group as well, there are other questions that are raised in the process with regards to the exemptions that are there in obtaining consent for children, such as with regards to education or healthcare, anything where there's data fiduciaries kind of rope in third-party management to process things and to have services, third-party service providers as well. So do those entities also come under these exemptions? That is another thing. Because a lot of schools and a lot of educational institutions have edtech platforms as well. So there is another question as to whether edtech platforms also fall under these particular exemptions. And another question that we have currently, and I want the audience also to touch upon this, is the fact about misrepresentation of children's age. So while a lot of data fiduciaries in line with the law, they might implement age gating. But then what happens if children misrepresent their age? How do data fiduciaries tackle this? Because in the end, the responsibility falls onto them. If it is found that they are processing children's data, but then they had no idea because the children have been misrepresenting their own age. So that is also another key issue that we need to address.
I think for that the law has that misrepresentation of facts, as so data principle itself is liable in case if it is the wrong representation of age is there. But the problem is the harm is still done. The purpose of restricting the age and having the consent is to so that the law takes care of the privacy part of it. But if somebody has somebody who is a minor and given the age as 18 plus, and some harm has been done to the person because of that, there is no what is a recourse for that. But yes, misrepresentation can be taken care of by the law. The answer, another thing which on the consent for the children is that linkage part, whether the parent can be linked to the child or not. Is there any discussion or the suggestion which has gone already to the government on this, that how they are going to work on this, that I am the father of so and so?
yeah, that's missing from the law. That's not,
Any
there is
suggestion,
no,
what is the option available?
if we can, ask them to give some sort of a proof. But then again, I mean, there are, I don't know how infrastructurally or we are ready for this because these are very sensitive groups.
The law is very silent on all these aspects. I don't think the rules are addressing this adequately. I think these
No,
are
the rule is silent on this. Like, how do you verify whether there is an actual parent or parental relationship with the child?
So earlier, what used to happen is what I mean. If I'm opening something, there is a consent form that pops in and say asking whether I'm 18 years old or not. And then if I click on 18, yes, I am 18 years old, then that's it. Then my consent is given. I'm approving and I'm giving this thing that I'm 18 years old. But how do you actually verify whether this person is 18 years old or whether this person is an adult? How do you ensure that there is a parent that is involved? What is the mechanism that is being followed here? I mean, I don't know. That would be another round of sort of data channeling altogether.
Yeah, can I speak? Am I audible?
Yes.
Yep. Yep,
Yes, yes,
Caleb.
please go ahead.
So I think it's a very relevant question when we talk about the child sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. Most of the cases of sexual exploitations are reported where the platform do not have the strict age verification measures. For example, you make an account and then you just have to click you are 18, you are below 18, you are above 18, just click in and then make your account. And then there are all sort of predators sitting over there who take advantages of all these children. So the issue here is we need a strict verification system where the children cannot make an account or to get access to these platform without a strict rule for age verification. So this issue can be solved if we can make sure that there is not every these platform, whether it's social media or any adult website or any sort of where you have access to your audios or videos, the rule should be on the liability should be on the platform to make sure that they should make it sure that any of the children who is below 18 should not get access to this platform. So there is an example. Australia recently has made this rule for the children that who is below 18. It's almost impossible under their new rules to make an account on even on the social media without their parents' consent. So to solve this issue, we need something regulation like what Australia is doing. Thank you.
I think, Kailash, a very important point that you mentioned is comparing with the Australian system. But then, they have very advanced systems to ensure the authenticity when a consent is given, unlike us. Plus, many of the Indian organizations lack the technical capability and the workforce training on the ground, which are required to manage these requirements effectively within a short timeline. So I think if we can, bring in more of course this comes at a cost. If we can bring in and implement more advanced systems to which wherein we can authenticate the consent which are given by the guardian or the parent of the children, and also the somebody who is disabled. Okay, and of course if we have the regular training, that will help to effectively manage these kind of cases. I'm not sure how ready we are on that front.
I believe there is a dire need for this investment, or to make these sort of compliances or to put pressure on these platform who hold or who are responsible for to these whole issues. Why? Because the evil is yet to come. When we talk about this issue from the perspective of AI development, let's say for an example, with the use of the AI, okay, there are a lot of child pornographic content which are AI generated on the social media. There, this issue become more complicated. Here, we can verify we can verify it easily whether the person is below the 80 years of age or above the 80 years of age. We do have options, although it's tough. But in AI, it almost become impossible. Let's say some creator has created a adult content that's showing that okay, all the person here in the pics or the videos are above 18 years of age. How would you verify if the age of the person who is depicted in the video or the pictures is looking like 9 years, 8 years of age, or 5 years of age? How would you going to challenge that thing? There is no laws for that, even under the DPDP Act or DP rules, or even not in the IT Act. So we need to take care of these things.
Yeah, and I think I think the introduction of the algorithmic due diligence that have been introduced for the significant data fiduciaries is on that positive note, because here the STFs have to ensure that there is any sort of personal data which is being processed, it does not infringe on the rights of the data principles, and it also aligns with your AI governance and discussions on AI governance at least. But there has to be a clear due diligence standards which can which can effectively manage. Otherwise, this will only pose more compliance challenges.
I think one will have to sort of draw lines, as you rightly said, with the Australian regulations. I don't think, developing an infrastructure is not that difficult. I mean, especially with private organizations in place, I mean, of course, there is going to be a cost implication on it, but developing it as such is not going to be that difficult once you are in a position to, uh, uh, if you have the financial means to adopt it.
I don't think the issue here, Atul, is the financial part only. Okay, how much bandwidth these organizations have. The other thing that is training, that is causing sort of anticipation or apprehension with the organizations are the existence of the legacy infrastructure. Because once you are bringing in a new technology which kind of helps you, aids you with the retention and the erasure of the erasing requirements or data tracking system, right? It will cause some sort of a drain to legacy infrastructure, and that's, I think, we get too comfortable as human beings. So that's also one of the point that has to be taken into consideration, that you are asking them to sort of introduce something which is completely new. And you know I mean, for an SDF at least there are stricter compliance mandates, but I mean, how do you take control of the data fiduciaries otherwise,
Apart
where there
from
is not a large scale data processing?
apart from the data fiduciary, role and their obligations to maintain the consent, there are going to be channels, because there are a lot of subcontracting here which happens. That a particular financial institution may be taking the consent and then giving it to some third party, which gives another third party, the data. So the contractual, review or contract review has to be done, at these companies level, that what are the liabilities these data processor or the further, if they have further down the line, those companies, what are the contract obligations they have. Suppose if the company has, data fiduciary is going to be liable for say 250 crore, they cannot pass on the liability to the data processor at the same level. They may not have the financial viability to pay that 250 crore. So what are the challenges? What are the things, which the companies, those who are data fiduciaries, they have to ensure that the data processors are also following the same level of due diligence, or, same level of what they call reasonable security measures.
It is something that the businesses will, of course, take care of, something like an ISO or the IT Act, right, where there are reasonable security measures which are already mentioned. So I think those businesses would anyway take care of, but
I
uh,
think even the DPDP rules also provide for certain security standards which needs to be
No, it
implemented.
doesn't.
Like
It doesn't. We have to go to the, SDPI rules where ISO 27001 has been mentioned, but DPDP rule doesn't provide that.
it's very vague. It's very vague. It talks about encryptions and masking of data. So it's a like for specific standards, yes, we'd have to go into the SDPI rules. But like the current draft DPDP rules provide for specific things such as encryption, having like strict access controls, masking of data, and contingency measures like data backup. So those are the only current provisions with regards to like reasonable security measures that the draft DPDP rules talk about.
I think we need to create a portal for making suggestions to these rules. What do you think? I mean, once we are able to compile all the suggestions that are there, and then we can make an effort to actually push it to the government.
Yeah, so I think that can be done. So one way is, of course, that, and the outcome document of this session will incorporate all the points. The recording will be on YouTube. That's one way. Second, of course, we can just create a form. People can fill pointers. If they wish to give an anonymous feedback, we are okay with that. Sometimes, people have their concerns, up to them. They wish to have attribution, that is also up to them. And then, yeah, I think I think based on the aspects of the deadline, I think we'll try our best, along with in coordination with committee chair Kailash, Ayush, Arunima, as well as Sanjana, so that we steer up the documentation process quickly, because I think February is a very short month, and yeah, the deadline might be near. Who knows? So I think we can do that. Yeah. And we'll pass it on to the advisory council, maybe also for the final inputs if anyone wishes to add. So yeah.
In fact, there was one, document from Niti Aayog, which they released in 2020 on the data empowerment and protection architecture. So that can be a very good document for the consent management system to evolve over a period of time. It came in 2020, and I don't know what happened, whether it was used or not, but it has a lot of features which can be used specifically for the consent management or the data protection in general.
And also, somewhere we need to align our data governance with the global standards. While I understand the whole prioritizing of the data sovereignty, but we are talking about businesses who are going to invest in technology. We are talking about businesses who are going to invest in legal expertise or training to address dynamic compliance needs. So if there is clarity on localization, algorithm due diligence, or the grievance redressal mechanism, this will only make it better for the future operations, especially from the business's perspective.
Exactly, because there's going to be like a massive shift in compliances and current business practices as well. Like, even with regards to the way notices are made right now, the rules specify notice to be like an independent and separate document or separate piece of information. And as of now, I think large standard business practice is to bundle it up with like end user license agreements or like any other agreements. So there is the habit of mixing it up with like other information as well. So considering that there's going to be like a massive shift in the way businesses have to proceed right now, I think clarity is the need of the hour at this point. Yes, I think somebody's trying to speak.
So, just to conclude, I think India's framework is, of course, promising at this stage, but it does require refinement to ensure balance between innovation and compliance. And anybody wants to add to that?
No, we totally agree with you. There's a lot of
Yeah, everyone does.
So, all right. Is there anything that anybody wants to add here? Anything that we missed out in the discussion?
Yeah. So, Sanjana, I think is there any aspect which is in the discussion points which might be left to discuss? You can
I think another pertinent point that we could probably like raise right now is what courses data principles possibly have. Because right now, what the law currently says is that, sorry, is Atul trying to speak? Sorry.
No, we have time
Okay,
right now. It's still
all right.
3:25.
Got it, got it. So yeah, with regards to the recourse for data principles, so there's various penalties that are being imposed on data fiduciaries and other entities as well. But there is no mention on what happens to the actual victims of data breaches. So there's penalties for data breaches, there's penalties if data fiduciaries do not take reasonable security measures, but there is no guidance or clarity on what data principles can do, what sort of compensation can be provided, because any and all penalties that are levied, I think, go directly into the consolidated fund of the central government. So I think that's one key aspect that we also require guidance about, and I'd like
that's a
to know what is
that's a very, very good point. I mean, I think some sort of compensation to the person who has actually lost his data. I don't think anybody has actually thought about it. Something that is required very much. The penalty that is being imposed on a potential violation of the DPDP Act is all the way up to 250 crores. But how much of it is actually coming to the person who has actually lost his data? Nothing. I mean, the law is silent on it.
Yeah, that's very, very important point. In fact, there is another point related to that, if I am a data principal and I'm, reporting some false accusation against, any data fiduciary, then the penalty is only 10,000 rupees. But that can also become one of the arm twisting industry that, you just have few people who are keep on, reporting about the data fiduciary, and then it becomes a, an issue for DPB to take care of those things. So the penalty for the wrong or malice, the complaint with malice should also be increased. The penalty should be increased there. I
Right,
have one
absolutely.
question.
I think that's a very pertinent point as well because frivolous complaints, I think we see that a lot right now, and we need to definitely tackle that as well. That's a very pertinent point that's been made.
There's one more point, I could not find that in the rules, Abhivadan and the rest of the team members. Can DPB take, cognizance of any data breach, suo moto, and, take an action against any data fiduciary? Anyone or Arunima?
Okay, so
Yeah, I think Atul would be the correct person to answer this.
I mean, I'll have to explore that. I couldn't find something of that nature. I mean, it's something that we need to think, do a little bit more deep dive on. We'll figure out some. Let me see whether we can find this answer. I think we'll park this one for now. But I did not see anything. I did not find anything that caught my eye on this aspect.
yeah, like no, it's not for data fiduciaries, no. But yeah, I think something related to this analysis was there about in one provision and one of the rules, but I don't think it's necessarily suo moto. It's something else entirely. So I don't think.
I mean, they do have, mandatory audits by introducing the mandatory data protection impact assessment, which is there, and the annual audits for the organizations. But these are again only applicable for significant data fiduciaries, and there is no, there is no threshold which has been defined. The thresholds are still unclear. So the criteria for classification, even for an SDF, and requirement for compliance are not explicitly defined. So there is a risk of potential overreach by the authorities. And as an SDF, I think that they bear more heightened obligations when it comes to these things. I haven't seen any suo moto if they can take cognizance of these complaints, because at the end of the day, the data principle, the way I look at it, it is my data.
What the board, if you look at section 27, it says the board shall exercise and perform following powers and functions, namely on receipt of intimation of a personal data breach. Now, receipt of intimation of a personal data breach need not necessarily be in the complaint form, right? I mean, it can be anything. Because after that, you have provisions. So 27(1)(a) is on receipt of intimation of a personal data breach. And then B and C, 27(1)(b) and C talks about a complaint is basically being made by a data principal. So when there are provisions when there is a specific provision for receipt of intimation of a personal data breach and taking action on it, I think this means that they can act suo moto. I mean that's
Yeah,
that would be my.
every time I think there is no need to like write in the act or rules that there should be suo motu power for them to enforce any in case of any breach. If you have a duty to take care of these, take care of your rights, you have given certain duties under the act. So definitely you also have a duty to take a suo motu action to, in case you heard about a breach, you something gets in your knowledge. It should not be like written, like necessary to be written in the acts or rules.
There is a mechanism that is being provided under the rules, which is how the complaint has to be presented and all those things. But this does not mean that the receipt of information, any kind of information, is completely unacceptable by the board. I mean, they can definitely take any kind of intimation that is coming its way. That's my reading.
Yeah, and just to add here, I think the DPB primarily acts upon any sort of complaint which is filed by the data principal, because it is whose data has been breached or misused, or there has to be a report submitted by the data fiduciary that there is a breach, okay, because they are mandated again by the law to notify the DPP of any sort of significant personal data breach which happens within the prescribed timeline, which is 72 hours. So unless these two come forward, I don't think DPB is in a position, or they have the visibility to know that something of the sort has transpired.
They can know from a third party as well. I can sort of come to know about it from another person, that oh, this person has actually leaked the data. The company, the data fiduciary, why would they shoot their own leg? They can definitely keep silent about it, but a third person has come to know about it, and they can make a complaint. As soon as I make the complaint, or if I'm making the intimation if I intimate the data protection board about the breach, then they are very well required to act upon it. Yeah. I mean, that's what section 27(1)(a) and C 1A, C and 1A, D and E talks about. I mean, it could be from the receipt of information, a complaint, or a reference that has been made by the central government. So it could be anything. And very recently, we have seen situations where, so for example, under the ICAI Act, okay, I'm talking about different regulation altogether, the different act altogether. We have seen a recent Delhi High Court judgment which talks about a situation where a complaint is being made. Earlier, the position was that a written complaint has to be made to this disciplinary committee or the board to say that this is what has happened, and there is the ICA has to receive a sort of a complaint in writing. Now that has been diluted by the Delhi High Court in a recent judgment of Sanjay Jain, which basically said that they can act suo motu on receipt of intimation. It just couldn't be a newspaper report, because a newspaper report you can't really rely upon. But some sort of a credible information that they are relying that is coming across to them in the form of some sort of along with some sort of you know. Evidence, I'm sure that they can act on it. I don't think it will be, they are restricted in any manner to act only on receipt of a complaint from a data principal.
Sorry, Atul. I first was the complaint by the data principal. The second part of my submission was the report which is submitted by the data fiduciary. Okay, so if there is any report, because they're mandated by the law. Now
Yes.
here they're not making complaints, but if a report is coming to the DPB, okay, it allows them to take certain action. But if honestly, I look at it more, generally reactive than proactive, if I can put it that way. And of course, the said rules and act does allow room for further clarification by the government. So let's see if they add on to the more additional part. But like you said, there has to be some sort of an intimation from somebody. Either a notification or a complaint, anything, but there has to be some sort of an intimation to the DPB.
Yeah, say something has been, identified at Telegram, and somebody says that, there's a huge data set which is available, which may have the personal identifiable information. Now, that if that comes to the notice of DPB, I think what Atul says that, section 27(1)(a) and the D, then they can invoke and they can actually take action against that data fiduciary who is responsible for that.
yeah.
So,
No, I'd let Atul add in. Sorry. Yeah. So, there was just one reference I just thought let's just add in since we're discussing this. There's something about Rule 4, paragraph 4, or let us say point 4, which is like if the is of the opinion that the concerned manager is not adhering to some obligations, it may ask of certain things, but this is one way to do so. But again, it might or might not be directly related to breaches, but it might be just related to some incumbent obligations per se. So that could be also one of the ways to look at it. But then it's not for every data fiduciary per se. So yeah.
Absolutely. I think there is, like I said, there is more room for clarification when it comes to the DPB powers.
No,
Who will be paying?
this will be developed through judicial precedents only, I think.
Hmm.
It can't be through a regulation as such. Has to come through judicial precedents.
Absolutely. I concur with that opinion of yours.
Who will be paying for the consent management? Is it the data fiduciary who will be paying to the consent management company for all the consent taking, or is it the data principal who has to, give money? Who will be funding it?
I think it will be delegation, right? Like the data fiduciary is letting concern manager handle their things. So, I mean, if they create a pain model, of course, that could be subject to interpretation in a court if necessary. I think it would be, but I think the company which is data fiduciary should be doing it.
Yes, I think by and large, it basically falls on the data fiduciary because they're essentially the ones who are hiring them. But again, considering that consent managers are not entirely mandatory, it also falls onto the data fiduciary whether if they'd want to like have an in-house consent model or if they want to like hire external consent managers for the same. So ultimately, it will fall onto the
Where are
data
we getting
fiduciary.
that consent manager are appointed by the data fiduciary? I mean, can't I have an independent consent manager who is going to manage my consent qua a certain data fiduciary? Why is that?
It would, because then that will create a conflict of interest, right? That will undermine the whole system's neutrality and trust. The idea is the consent manager have to be neutral. So they cannot compromise on certain aspects, right?
Yeah, you're right, Arunima. Suppose, I am the data fiduciary, and if I, give money to another consent manager to manage, which means, I'm paying for the services, uh, there will be, some amount of, what to say, my obligation to, as a consent manager, management company, I have some obligation or personal obligation, I'm saying, to the data fiduciary also. Will it not be leading to some kind of conflict?
I think that obligation, the rules also clarify for they place the obligation on consent managers. So the draft rules specifically also talk about that. So the rules specifically provide for such avoidance of conflict of interest as well.
No, because I'm looking at section 668. It specifically says that the consent manager shall be accountable to the data principal and shall act on her behalf in such manner and subject to such obligations as may be prescribed. So where the consent manager does not have any obligation or does not have any relationship directly with the data fiduciary. I don't know. So the
So,
funding, insofar as the
see,
consent manager is concerned, it's probably not going to come from the data fiduciary. It has to come from the data principal because ultimately it is the
Hmm.
principal he's being accountable to the data principal, right?
Yes, and then the question will come, whether as a data principal, I am ready to pay for, such services, or I'll be forced
Yes.
to pay for such services.
and to add on to that, the rules are encouraging to explore more innovative business model to ensure that the platforms is still sustainable while adhering to the regulatory and the ethical guidelines. So whether you take fiduciary or as the beneficiary or the data principal as the beneficiary, It all depends on what suits the business. However, at this stage, I don't think it is clear whether the data principals would be willing to pay for these services. So there is the challenge here that I see is a lack of strong regulatory mandate for fiduciaries to integrate with consent manager.
Arunima, let us take an example. I don't have DigiLocker for that matter. Okay, I do not want to avail the service of DigiLocker. But does that mean that I do not have an Aadhaar card? Does that mean that I do not have a PAN card? Does that mean that that the government does not have the data that is being given in my Aadhaar card? It's not so, right? I mean, I can definitely choose not to avail the service of consent manager. No, I can choose not to have a consent manager in place at the end of the day. It is entirely my discretion as a data principal, because the consent manager is going to be responsible or is going to be answerable to the data principal, not to the data fiduciary. At least that's how I understand it. Unless that consent manager has been provided for through the data fiduciary. So, for example, in this case, in the case of the DigiLocker, I mean, it's DigiLocker is a platform that has been provided by the government. So maybe that ways probably it is answerable, but not directly. At the end of the day, it is always going to be answerable to the data principal, not to the data fiduciary.
Yeah, I mean, to see, Atul, whether this will be successful or not, the model will also depend on how effectively the consent managers are able to balance the interest of data fiduciary principles and regulators. And the other aspect of it is, while the minute your data is stored in a digital format, unlike the GDPR, the DPDP becomes applicable. So here, if the data is still stored in the physical format somewhere, not digital, the Data Protection Act doesn't come into play. So I think that's another, glitch that's there.
I think we need to look at more into the schedule to the first schedule to the rules, where we are talking about the conditions and registrations of the consent manager and their obligations. It again talks about consent manager shall enable a data principal using its platform to give consent.
And the platform provides a more standardized mechanism for a whole sort of consent manager across your various sectors. But it's again classified as a regulated activity under the rules.
No doubt about it. I'm not for a moment questioning that, but ultimately, I mean, we're coming back to the first question that Ajay had asked: who is going to fund the consent manager? It is not going to be the data fiduciary. I don't think it can be the data fiduciary.
See, at this stage, it is not clear. I don't think it is clear, because even whether the data principals would be willing to pay or not is something which is still dicey.
It is discretion. No, it is my discretion. As I said, if I choose not to have a DigiLocker, it is my discretion. I can choose not to have DigiLocker, but I would still have an Aadhaar card and a PAN card. If I'm willing to pay for it, then I'm willing to pay for it. It's my choice whether to pay for it or not.
Of course, the whole concept of a consent manager is relying heavily on the voluntary integration and the compliance, right? So if the consent manager has to operate across different industries, they need the voluntary integration with the data principals and data fiduciaries, and even the regulatory authorities for that matter.
The same people that pay for insurance will pay for it. It is an insurance. If the law, if it will be enshrined in law, like for example, the enforcement of multi-factor authentication, there are services that are demanded by law to have it. Who's paying for it? The users are paying for it.
Yes. Yes.
So that's who will pay for it, but not unless it is made mandatory, obviously within balance, because there are many cases that probably not gonna need it. But when we're talking special protective identifiable information, SPII, I know like biometrics and so on, maybe it will be enforced, demanded by law, then the users of that service, probably the businesses, right? They will factor in their costs and they will price their offering accordingly. Either they absorb the cost, and again, at scale, this is not going to be a high cost. Yeah, significantly nonetheless, but we're not talking high cost here at scale. It's going to just fiddles out across. For small companies, yes, it will be a little bit higher, but even that can be external. So it's similar to insurance and the cost of multi-factor authentication. Similar.
Which is why consent manager itself has aspects of corporate governance also in the rules. If you see that there are all the time some references to Companies Act, etc. So I think, yeah, it's kind of like that. Yeah.
It's more like an also, an account aggregator, because how you have the account aggregator framework from regulators like RBI or SEBI or IDAI, which I had previously mentioned in my while we were discussing the whole consent manager concept, right? They function similar to that. They are more as an intermediary, but there is no processing or storing of data by them. And right now, there is no regulatory push mandating fiduciary participation when it comes to the appointment of consent managers. So they rely heavily on the voluntary integration and compliance, whether it is the data principal as the beneficiary or it is data fiduciary as the beneficiary.
So
Like,
regarding the
put it like
previous
that.
question,
Put it like that. If and specifically social media cases, but not just that, e-commerce and so on, like so many use cases. Put it like that. If the law introduces repercussions, serious repercussions for people that don't really identify underage users. Yeah, you just have a click button, confirm you're 18, like really. The risk is this manager, adopting this manager or not, and run the risk to, well, even go to jail maybe. So it's a balance, like in insurance. Is the risk high enough? Yes, the law can make it high enough. Or not really, because the way I'm operating it doesn't really apply much. And then in that case, well, maybe you don't have to use it because chances are you're not going to break the law. But the thing is, it has to be enforced. Like car insurance. Car insurance. You have to have car insurance. Sure, you may choose not to have it, but the risk is too high to be caught and be fined heavily, right? Or even your driving license revoked or whatever. So that's where it boils down to. But again, the proposal has to be accepted in some form and then forced by the legal authorities and the government, in fact, because they will gonna enforce it. The legal authorities is gonna, build the law and make the provisions, but it's worthless if it's not enforced. So it's really similar to insurance.
And while the fiduciaries can definitely benefit from, a reduced operational burden by outsourcing the consent manager, the challenge here is that if you charge them, this would create a conflict of interest, because then the whole neutrality and the trust is gone out of the window. So, and then we don't know if the data principal, I mean, if I talk about me, I don't know how comfortable I am, to pay for these kind of services, whether I'm willing or not. So again, this all requires, a more practical experience, implementation rather, to see how do we bring in these innovative business models and make it more a sustainable platform for the future.
Well, it is, again, I think this is really political because If the electorate, the people will know about this idea, that is practical, it can be implemented without, it really is practical. The same as MFA and authenticators is a practical idea and it works. We see that it works. Is that they will demand it. Mothers and fathers will demand that the age verification is robust and easy. And they have assurances that, hey, if my 15-year-old goes on the internet, these nasty sites really block them because they will fail verification. They will demand it. So it can become one of the election points, make or break for governments, for parties to win elections. But for that, the public has to know about it. Happened here with, especially in Germany. Germany is a very privacy conscious nation. The reason why GDPR was adopted, one of the big reasons, not the only one, is that Germany demanded it. Why demanded it? Because the electorate demanded it. They demanded protections back in before 2013 because of all this advent of anything goes on the web. And so that was one of the main reasons. If it doesn't translate in a threat to the political establishment, I personally think things don't happen. Things don't happen. They have to be threatened in some way of sort. Oh, okay, this has tremendous repercussions down the line for our party. Then it will happen. It's always the same in the history of humankind, not just now in 21st century. Big things happen if there is an existential threat to the status quo, to something else that is very important. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. Yeah, the idea is good, it's practical, it's this and that. Yeah, but the politicals are don't really buying into it. That's all I'm saying. It really is political in the end at this scale. It's not like the idea is very good. Yeah, I keep saying that. And it's well summarized in the slides, right? You could see it's structured. It really, the slides fit in with EU law, international law, pretty much in the same framework. It's not something wild that we've been presented here. So there's nothing wrong with the idea, but again, looking at the practicalities, really the politicals should buy into it a little bit. They have to. Otherwise, who's gonna support it, right? If you look, if I can make a comparison, I know it's not really like for like, but it has the same repercussions. On any social media platform, when you as a user have an account there, you would think that's your account, but actually it's not your account at all. It's not at all your account. It belongs to the platform. And if you look in the TOSs, it clearly states on LinkedIn and blah, blah. It's like, it's not your account. And also they say everything you post, comment, like, blah, blah, it belongs to the platform, not to you. It's generated by you, but it doesn't belong to you. Even your picture, if you put it there. Okay, they inform that. Now, so you say, but there's no problem. But here is a problem. You post something and it belongs to the platform. But if something nasty from bad actors and pornificators and all these nasty people happen, posting all this misinformation, disinformation, pornification and theft of IP and so on the platform, then they say, no, it's not our job and we don't have any liabilities there, it's not our responsibility. So really, they want to have their cake and eat it. So no responsibility, but your data belongs to us. Well, if I'm a bad actor, you say, well, it's the bad actor's fault, it's not our fault. But on the other hand, if I post something really useful for like, I don't know, 1 million views or something, the rights belong to the platform, not to myself. These are clear contradiction, right? And
No,
the law
I
does
think
nothing about
here,
it.
no, so here, when a platform is collecting any sort of data, they seek a license to use that data. They do not own it. And they typically mention it, even they outline it in their terms of service. So the data is still mine. the license is necessary for the platform to function. For example, displaying my post to the other users on LinkedIn. So it does not mean the platform would own my content outright, but it can, of course, use it beyond the scope of what has been agreed upon without consequences. That I agree with you.
If it's
And
a
I think
controller, then it owns it. If it's a controller, then it owns it. The controller, the data controller, essentially owns the data. Wherever the law admits it or not, that's what happens. The data controller owns what it controls. Why? Because it decides what happened to what and when and how. Not exactly processing it and doing it, but say, feed this algo. Feed this data through the algo to these people. And that's your data right there. You don't decide what happens to it. So you don't own it in practice. That's what I'm saying. And so the law doesn't admit that yet.
The data, no, so Bogdan, data controller doesn't own the data. It is only
But in fact, it
responsible for
does.
deciding how, no, it is only responsible for deciding how your data is processed and stored and used as per the legal framework wherever it is, they are being governed. Ownership is remaining with the data principle.
But you don't have any say in it.
See, when you talk about controller, their role is more about accountability and compliance. Okay. For example, if the controller misuses the data, it doesn't mean the data was theirs to begin with. It means they breached their obligation. So platforms like Meta, Google, LinkedIn, they often require a license to process data for operational purpose, but they still do not own your data. So I think our focus is on about how we remain transparent and how these platforms are going to use our data and how do we hold them accountable if they are overstepping the agreed scope which I have signed for. Call it terms and conditions, call it their privacy policy, call it their cookie compliance policy, right? So I think that is where the regulatory framework would come in. That's where the whole DPDP has also been brought in to sort of enforce more transparency and accountability. So I think
in 2024, one of my acquaintances on LinkedIn, a distinguished security engineer, was banned by LinkedIn for no reason. Now, it's his data, right? He can't access it. There's no recourse to action. He wrote and this and that. It took more than 2 weeks to get it back, to get the access back. And only because there was a lot of noise on the platform about that, on the other hand, and because there's no human oversight. So that's illegality number one, no recourse to action. Yeah, sure, you can submit blah, blah, but nobody reviews it. It goes through the same pretty much algo. So it's a conflict of interest, right? The same entity that banned me, the same entity, automated, no human oversight, decides if I have a recourse to action or not. That's illegality number one. Illegality number two is that I was not explained what for. It's just a generic reason, but really there was no reason behind it. Okay, so that's illegality number two. You don't explain why such a drastic action has been taken to the user. You don't. It's just a generic thing that goes to everybody. So that's illegality number two. Illegality number three is that you don't even have a reply back except for that. So let's say, well, we're looking into it, even if you don't, but we're looking into it and you do something about it. That's a complete opaque box. I don't want to use the word black because black is just the absence of light. Opaque box. You don't know nothing. You're just in the middle of nowhere. Now, if the guy would have a revenue stream out of it because he had business contacts on LinkedIn and this and that, things in flight, and all of a sudden all stopped. And it happened to other people, by the way. This is not a unique case. No recourse to action, and you don't actually own your data. I mean, you may think you do, but in practice, you don't. So who owns it? The owner of the infrastructure owns it, the data controller.
You also have to take into consideration the automated systems here who are making these decisions without human intervention. So when you talk about LinkedIn or when you talk about Meta or Instagram for that matter, right? If I am posting something which is not in line with their TNC or their policy, they will flag it and they will temporarily suspend my account or block it. But that being said, I also have, as an end user, I have the right to appeal to them and, or reach out to them, ask for, raise my concerns. So I think all of these sites are anyway offering a meaningful mechanism. Look at what has happened in Meta's case in India today. Meta has been fined significantly because it was sharing data across different platforms. So it's not like, the users do not have a clear or a structured process when it comes to these sort of decision. But here, when you bring in an technology or an AI for that matter, there are biases which are involved, which also needs to be taken into consideration. And large platforms like LinkedIn or Meta, they process millions of users and they rely mostly on automation. So they do not have any human intervention to manage these sort of content or accounts. So
What they do,
these are
yeah, what they
these.
do, and they do it to India and to any other. And by the way, I personally consider that is a desnationalization risk to emerging economies like India because they just don't know how to protect themselves yet. I mean, they're capable to knowing, but they are sidelined. They are sidelined. So essentially, what happens is this: the platform takes the money and externalizes the risks. They externalize the risk to society and to the end users, but they take the money in the form of data. That's what really is about. That's what's happening. Whatever the law accepts it or not, it doesn't matter. That's the truth. That's a fact. And we could see it at scale, like times and again. This is not something, oh, it may happen once in a while. No, it happens every day in, day out for millions of businesses and people around the world, I'm talking about. So this is like really undisputable. That's what's happening. That's what's happening. They externalize the risk to the end users and to society, but they take the money. They
Bogdan, if that
want to
is the
have the cake and
case,
eat it.
sorry, Bogdan, I just wanted to understand. I mean, if that is the case, then the whole purpose of having a data protection law becomes,
Becomes
redundant.
more stringent. Becomes more stringent.
No, the whole purpose of having a data protection law that we have it in place today. I mean, the DPDP Act itself, the whole purpose of, and the whole concept of DPDP Act is that the data that you supply to these social media platforms, say LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever it is, as Arunima said, that data that you are providing to these organizations, they're your data. If it is not your personal data, then what is the purpose of having a DPDP Act? If it is owned by
Well,
if it is owned by
no,
LinkedIn,
no,
then it is going to be
it's not your
LinkedIn.
data because nobody owns their own data. Show me the law that states that what you type on the any app running on the public cloud, any app, let's say I don't know, Office 365. Okay, show me a law, name it anywhere in the world that says that data belongs to you legally. There isn't any. There is no concept. There's no concept of personal data being owned by the data subject. There isn't. Like it's pretty known that
No.
whatever data is associated with you, your face, your signature, and so on, that data is not the signature belongs to you, but when you type it, that ceases to belongs to you. You are not the owner of your data, not you, not me,
The
and
moment
not
I am
President
giving the
Trump
data,
either.
but the moment I'm writing it to in that particular platform, then I am the one who, that is the whole purpose. The concept of DPDP Act as it stands today is about giving consent to that particular platform to use a process that signature that I'm giving to them, right? If I'm giving my photo to that particular platform, then I need to decide how that photo is to be used by that platform or not. I mean, if
And
it is
you
if
can't.
I
That's what I'm saying. You can't, and nobody can. Nobody can.
I beg to
That's what
differ
I'm
there,
saying.
but
Yeah, you
So
give the
we are
consent, I
running
agree with that.
short.
But
We are
you don't
already
own your data the moment it goes out.
so
You
we are
don't,
already
and I don't,
past the
nobody. Yeah.
sorry, Bogdan. We are already, past the session's time and we'll have to end the
So just
conversation.
my conclusion is that you covered it all at high level in the presentation. You covered all the points. Of course, there's a lot of discussion around it because it has to be adapted to the particular use case. There are a number of big use cases. There will be differences how it can be applied. But the principles, for me, I think that's covered at high level as core principles. It's all covered. I don't see anything significant missing personally. So, good presentation, by the way. And again, I don't see gaps at high level.
Glad you liked our presentation. That was an end-minute thing that we prepared. So thank you for your kind words. And that would be all from my end. Sanjana, if you want to add anything to conclude.
Yes, yes. So just wanted to thank everybody for taking the time out on a weekend and attending this session. I think we've had some very important key perspectives that were discussed, though not everything I think we could possibly agree upon, but that is completely fine. I think that is the entire purpose of such discussion is to like listen and understand the various perspectives that like one could possibly have. And with regards to this discussion today as well, I think it was a step in the right direction because it's discussions like these that play like a very important role in helping the policymakers as well to like refine the current rules. Like only if we are able to identify what the current gaps are as well, we'll be able to help, present our feedback as well better. So just want to thank everybody for attending the session and Arunima as well for being such a lovely chair for this session and Abhivardan as well from ISAIL for giving this opportunity. So thank you everybody. And over to you, Abhivardan.
Yeah,
Sure.
just can I speak just one point? It was regarding
Right.
the
Sure.
Suamoto power of the board, right? Someone has asked this question. So I think under the section 27, they have mentioned that the only the information ones get from the central government, state government, and data fiduciary under section 8 and the data principle. These all four entities are mentioned, and then there is one more place it's written that the information received from the aggrieved person. Apart from this, there is no other provision that the board can take action. And I believe why it's not written that the board can take the suamoto action. I think it's because of to check the uh, to keep a check on their power so that they cannot take the undue advantage of their power or to misuse the power. I think that's why it's not given here. That's it.
Thanks, Kailash.
So I think this was a delightful committee session, and I think this video will be helpful for people who will binge watch it. So yeah, I was just thinking if it would be appropriate or possible for anyone who is present right now who would like to open up their camera for just a minute. We can just have a headshot, like a group photograph. Then we'll conclude. And yeah, thank you so much for being cooperative on this. I think I also found it interesting. So